Friends, welcome. Today we are going to talk about something that is happening right now, something that the mainstream press will report on as a simple business transaction, a meeting of suits and ties, a trade mission. But you and I know if we are going to understand the economic system we live in, if we are going to understand capitalism in its current globalized and crisis ridden form, we have to look deeper. We have to look at what is happening between Canada and Mexico this week. We have to look at this massive delegation, nearly 400 people led by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, descending on Mexico City. And we have to ask the question, why? Why now? And what does this tell us about the structural anxieties plaguing the North American economy? To understand this, you have to start with the history, the context that is almost always left out of the glossy brochures and the polite press conferences. For decades, for generations, the Canadian economy has been structured in a very specific, very dependent way. It has been an economy oriented almost exclusively toward the United States. You know the old saying, when the US sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Well, economically, that has been the reality. The United States is the behemoth, the empire, the center of gravity, and for Canadian capitalists, for the class of people who own the factories, the banks, the telecommunications giants, the path of least resistance has always been north. You produce in Canada, you sell to the US. It's easy, it's comfortable. The language is the same, the legal structures are similar. The border, until recently, was relatively porous for goods. Capital, like water, flows downhill, flows where it is easiest to make a profit. And for 100 years, that flow was north south. But now look at what is happening. We see a frantic, almost desperate scramble to change that flow. We see Candice Lang, the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, leading what she calls a Team Canada approach to Mexico. Why? She tells us quite plainly in the interviews. She says, we have gotten a little bit comfortable. That is a polite, diplomatic way of saying something much more profound. It is a way of saying that the Canadian capitalist class is terrified. They are terrified because the United States is no longer the stable, reliable guarantor of their profits that it once was. They look at the rising protectionism in the US. They look at the political instability. They look at the threats to tear up trade agreements, and they realize they have all their eggs in one basket, and that basket is shaking. So what do? They turn to Mexico. And this is where the analysis gets interesting. This isn't just a few friends meeting for lunch. This is nearly 400 delegates. We are talking about representatives from advanced manufacturing, from agriculture, from the creative industries, from telecommunications. They are going down there to hold over 2,000 business to business meetings. Think about what that represents. That is 2,000 moments where capital is trying to find a new home, a new outlet, a new way to expand itself because the old ways are blocked or dangerous. This is the nature of capitalism. It must expand. It cannot sit still. If one door closes, it must kick down another. And right now, the door to the US is creaking shut, or at least the toll to get through is getting higher. Candice Lang talks about leaning in. She talks about the intentionality required. This is a very revealing word. Intentionality. What she means is that the market, left to itself, the invisible hand that the economists love to preach about, didn't do this. The market was lazy. The market went to the US because it was easy to go to Mexico, to build relationships with a culture that speaks a different language, that has different legal traditions, that requires a different kind of negotiation, that takes intentionality. It takes work. It takes the state and the Chamber of Commerce intervening to push these businesses out of their comfort zone. It proves once again that the idea of a free market that naturally optimizes everything is a myth. These markets are constructed, they are built by political decisions and by the desperate need of corporations to survive. Let's look at the sectors they are targeting. Advanced manufacturing. Why that? Because under the customer agreement, the new NAFTA, there are strict rules about where things are made, particularly in the auto sector. If you want to sell a car in North America duty free, a huge chunk of it has to be made here. So Canadian manufacturers need Mexican partners. They need to integrate their supply chains, not just to sell to Mexico, but to survive the regulatory framework that the United States imposed. They are reacting to the rules of the game set by the dominant imperial power. Then you look at agriculture. Canada wants to sell its food. Mexico has a growing population. It's a classic exchange. But look at the creative industries. This is interesting. This is the export of culture, of film, of media. Capital seeks to commodify every aspect of human life, including our stories, our art, and they see in Mexico a market for that. But here is the contradiction. Here is what we must not miss. This trade mission is framed as a win-win. We hear about opportunity. Candace Lang says there's a ton of opportunity. Opportunity for whom? Who wins when a Canadian telecom giant strikes a deal with a Mexican partner? Do the workers in Mexico see their wages rise to Canadian levels? Or does the Canadian capital go there precisely because wages are lower? Do the workers in Canada see more job security? Or do they see their jobs threatened by efficiencies found in the supply chain? The history of these trade agreements, from NAFTA to CUSMA, has been a history of capital doing very well and labor, working people, struggling to keep up. The profits flow to the shareholders of the companies sending those 400 delegates. The opportunity is an opportunity for profit accumulation. We have to understand that this relationship between Canada and Mexico has been underdeveloped. As the document notes, Mexico is Canada's third largest trading partner, but it is a distant third. The volume is a fraction of the U.S. trade. They are trying to jumpstart this. They are trying to compress decades of relationship building into a few days of frantic meetings. Lang mentions that they have counterparts in Mexico who are equally organized. This is important. It is not just Canadian capital invading Mexico. It is the Mexican capitalist class reaching out to the Canadian capitalist class. They are shaking hands over the heads of the workers in both countries. The Mexican business elite sees an opportunity to diversify away from their dependence on the U.S. as well. Both of these secondary economies, Canada and Mexico, are realizing they are trapped in the orbit of a declining American sun, and they are trying to build a little heat between themselves. And let's be clear about the scale. 400 delegates. That is not a small thing. That is a mobilization. It requires logistics, planning, money. It shows you how serious the crisis of confidence in the U.S. market really is. If things were going well, if the U.S. economy was booming and open and friendly, you wouldn't see 400 Canadian executives getting on planes to Mexico City with this level of urgency. This is a defensive maneuver disguised as an offensive one. They are selling it as expansion, but it is really diversification of risk. It is an insurance policy. When we hear about advanced manufacturing being a focus, we have to peel back the label. What does that mean? It means automation. It means robotics. It means high-tech production. It means fewer jobs for the amount of output produced. So even if trade increases, even if the dollar value of goods flowing between Toronto and Mexico City doubles, it does not mean that employment will double. In fact, The drive for competitiveness that fuels these missions is often a drive to cut costs, which means cutting labor costs. So the Canadian worker is told, this is great for our economy, but the Canadian worker might find that the efficiency gained by integrating with Mexico results in their factory closing or their wages stagnating because the company can now threaten to move production south. And the Mexican worker is told foreign investment is coming, but they find that the investment comes with strings attached, with demands for low taxes, for lax regulations, for flexible labor laws. This is the game, this is the system. And what is striking about this specific interview with Candice Lang is the admission of how underutilized the trade agreements have been. They signed CUSMA years ago. They have had free trade on paper, but trade didn't happen. Why? Because, as I said, capital is lazy. It takes a crisis or the threat of a crisis to make them move. They were comfortable making money the easy way. Now that the easy way is threatened, they are suddenly champions of Mexican-Canadian friendship. It is purely transactional. There is no deep cultural solidarity driving this. It is the solidarity of the balance sheet. You also have to look at the geopolitical angle. Canada and Mexico are both middle powers in this context. They're trying to figure out how to navigate a world where the U.S. is becoming more isolationist and China is rising. They are caught in the middle. This trade mission is a way of saying, can we survive together if the big guy upstairs stops buying our stuff? It is a survival strategy for the national bourgeoisies of Canada and Mexico. And they are using the Chamber of Commerce, which is essentially the union for the bosses, to organize it. Notice how organized they are. The bosses are always organized. They have their chambers, their trade missions, their lobbyists. They have Team Canada. Do the workers have a team labor meeting in Mexico City right now? Are there 400 union leaders from Canada meeting with 400 union leaders from Mexico to discuss how to protect wages and safety standards across borders? No, there are not. And that difference, the organization of capital versus the fragmentation of labor, explains why these trade deals always end up benefiting the few at the expense of the many. We must also scrutinize the sectors again. Clean tech and green economy are often thrown around in these discussions. They will say this trade mission is about building a sustainable future. But within the framework of capitalism, green is just another commodity. It is another way to make profit. If they can make money selling solar panels or electric vehicle parts to Mexico, they will. If they could make more money selling coal, they would do that too. The morality of the market is the morality of the bottom line. So when they talk about advanced manufacturing in the context of a green transition, we should be skeptical. We should ask, is this really about saving the planet, or is it about cornering a market before the Chinese or the Europeans do? The competition for the Mexican market is fierce. Canada is late to the party, as Lang admits. They have been complacent. Now they are rushing to catch up. This rush, this urgency, it creates mistakes. It creates bubbles. It creates exploitation. When you have 2,000 meetings in a few days, the pressure to sign deals is immense. And in the fine print of those deals, the rights of communities, the rights of workers, the environmental protections, those are the things that get traded away. They are the friction that the trade mission wants to remove. Frictionless trade is the dream of the capitalist, but friction is often democracy. Friction is often environmental regulation. Friction is often a union contract. They want to grease the wheels so that capital can slide effortlessly across the border while people, human beings, are stopped at the wall. So, as we watch this event unfold, as we read the headlines about the success of the Canada Mexico trade talks, let's keep our critical hats on. Let's remember that this is a symptom of a system in flux, a system in distress. It is the sound of Canadian capital realizing that the American dream is turning into a bit of a nightmare and looking for a new bed to sleep in. It is not a benevolent exercise in international friendship. It is a calculated, desperate, and highly organized maneuver by the ruling class to secure their future. And as always, the question remains, where are the people in this equation? Where are the voices of the workers who produce the advanced manufactures and the agri-food? They are not in the room. They are back on the factory floor, waiting to be told what the new deal is. And that, my friends, is the fundamental problem. That is why we critique this system. Because until the people who do the work are the ones making the decisions about where the products go and how they are traded, we will remain pawns in a game played by 400 delegates in a Mexico City hotel ballroom.